Welcome to this episode of Life Science Success. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don, and I'm a consultant in life sciences and also a digital marketer. And before we get started today, I have just a quick word from our sponsor.
Episode of Life Science Success is brought to you by D3 Digital Media Marketing. Dive into the digital world with confidence and creativity on your side. D3 Digital Media Marketing is your all-in-one solution for making a lasting impact online. From the vibrant, engaging world of social media marketing, podcasts, and webinars to the strategic depths of website development, SEO, pay-per-click, email, and content marketing, we tailor our approach to fit your unique brand story. Let's elevate your presence, connect with your audience, and drive success together. Your digital journey starts here. Visit d3digitalmedia.com to learn more.
In this episode of Life Science Success, my guest is William Hind. William's the founder of Alpha Maxum. They're transforming how pharma companies communicate their value to healthcare providers, and I'm excited to have him on because it's not very often that I get to talk to somebody that's also very interested in how we communicate inside of life sciences. So welcome, Will.
Thank you very much for having me, Don. Great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to be on. Could you just start by telling us a little bit about yourself and how you got into, kind of this route of life in terms of both the communication side and also communicating things in healthcare or life sciences?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I many years ago, I started work in a small company called MSD, otherwise known as Merck in the US. And I went through the sales and marketing route that many of us used to do. But one of the things that really stuck for me was the phrase that George Merck used in setting it up, and that was that never forget that medicine is for the patients. It's not for the profits. And if the profits will follow, and the more you think about the patients, the profits will grow. So I've always kind of kept that as a little mantra. And I've moved through MSD in Europe and then into various agencies in the UK, always in sort of international roles and looking at how to best communicate launches and increasingly in sort of more specialized, more focused types of rare and difficult to treat diseases. And there's been a kind of common theme about looking at what do we need to do? How do we need to raise the unmet medical need so that people are aware of it? And then through that, looking at, well, if that's the key issue, then we need to understand what people's beliefs are, because if you can change the beliefs, you're going to change the behaviors. Yeah. So that's a real short potted history, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what led you to Merck originally? What sort of landed you there?
I started straight from university and went into the civil service, and that was good. It was really interesting back in the days pre-computers, really, and it was a lot of meetings and a lot of hierarchy. But it kind of taught me that whilst it was a very good thing to be doing, very noble, it was also something that I didn't want to do. In that I felt that I had some knowledge, and in the medical sphere, I also wanted to be rewarded more about actually my own results rather than sitting in a bureaucracy, for want of a better word. And then I looked around, and at that point, most of the pharmaceutical industries, we're talking 1989 sort of time, most of the pharmaceutical industry was really looking to expand, and one of the key focuses for expansion was a prolific growth in sales forces across the area. So I was lucky enough to look at that. I joined MSD largely because that founding principle was one that resonated with me. I wanted to make a difference, if you like. And also because they had a really good training scheme and management development scheme. So those were key fundamental things that drove me at that point in time.
So I mean, really strong foundation as well. I mean, I just think about the way that many of us learn some of these things that are foundational for companies that are growing, foundational for companies that want to expand now, and as they come through kind of the continuum, The having such a foundation and seeing how a large corporation works, I feel like gives you this inside baseball, to use an American term, where you know a little bit of how these things sort of should wind up, and then the next question is how do they evolve throughout time, which really brings me
Yeah.
to my next question, which is what if we fast forward in your career, then you found Alpha Maxum, and in 2001, tell me what led you to do that.
Um, as I say, I worked for MSD and some other marketing agencies. At the time, there was a lot of focus on strategy and change management. So this was the time that some of those big mega mergers and things of that going on. And my kind of feeling was that there was also possibly the place of being overlooked, the potential to do good tactics, great storytelling. And there was a lot of focus on strategy, but almost to the exclusion of doing, the implementation of it, which is the tactics, right? So I set up Alpha Maxim really to do that good storytelling, to do, the ability to tell good stories well, really was the funding principle. And that's really how we started. Um, and then, like most people, it was on a shoestring in a back office in some small damp place. But then we grew and progressed from there.
Yeah, and so I mean, I guess the one sort of question that I'm left with as well is, um, what made you focus in on story, and what made you focus in on the message that gets communicated across?
I think one of the things that having done marketing in Merck, who were very good, and their courses and the stuff that they enabled us to learn was tremendous. Um, and being frank, I'd have stayed in there for the rest of my time, were it not for the fact that there were so many people, and at the time there was a large, almost, well, not a glass ceiling, but it became very difficult to get across and progress elsewhere. So I relished the opportunity that learning gave me, and I think one of the key things that it really did work, having worked with them on the launch of Fosamax, on some other brands, in particular in the UK, um, the 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 understanding that if you get that pre-launch and that understanding of how to get the unmet medical need communicated effectively, then the rest of it falls into place. You don't have to sort of talk immensely about some mode of action that doctors really don't care about. What you want to talk about is why that mode of action is important to them and why they need something different. And for that to take place, you have to have the story, they have to have the opening chapters where where Goldilocks gets captured or something. But it's making sure that that story is correct, that you can understand how to make that change and how to bring about the appreciation that things could get better.
I mean, I really wonder though. So you're saying, what I hear you saying is that it's not about the chemistry and the interaction inside of the cells, but it's much more about that figuring out the story and the linkage for everyone for that unmet need. I feel like so many people, the reason why I'm sort of re-emphasizing this point is because, I mean, one of the things that I do a lot in digital marketing, people will bring either their pitch deck or they bring their website, and essentially in the first few pages, they've already sort of leaped just directly into here's the science, because that's the
Yeah.
easy thing to describe. Now, the question that's always left on the table is that, okay, so, but why? Why would I
Why should
want
I
another
care?
drug here? Why would I want
Yeah.
to use yours? Why, what is it that you're delivering that's different, and how?
Mm.
And those pieces oftentimes just aren't explored, and I see it, I mean, repeated on almost a daily basis anymore.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. It's the understanding and appreciation of why should they care, right? Why should they bother? And for me, it's got to be back to the patients. And people have talked about, in fairly recent times, people talk about patient centricity, but the whole concept needs to be about finding out what that real unmet medical need is and how you're going to solve it and why your science makes a difference, why your mode of action is so important, why whatever your PK details are impressive, because only then will people appreciate how you're going to get the actual change of behavior that you need.
Yeah.
Pharma's fantastic. Pharma's a brilliant. I love being in pharma. I think it's one of the most fantastic areas that we could be in. And the idea that we're sort of in some small way, all of us are helping for the betterment of human health is fantastic. But despite all of these changes, despite this fantastic evolution of science, when I started in pharma, we were talking about enalapril and simvastatin. We're now talking about gene therapies and rare diseases and immunology and fantastic areas of advance. So much so that it blows your mind. It really does. Yet the communications ability and the way that we do those communications has barely changed at all. Yeah, okay, there's new channels and there's social media and there's websites and things which we are fantastic, but unless you get that story straight, what's the point, right?
Right. Well, and I mean, the unfortunate thing about, a website and things like that, as well as that people are left to interpret on their own. And so if you leave the wrong details there, they're going to leave with the wrong impression. And
Yeah.
you sort of start off on that wrong foot with the story in the first place. But I do want to come back to you, though. So, I mean, the one thing that I really greatly appreciate is whenever somebody goes through and creates a results mechanism of their own. And so, I
Mm.
see that Alpha Maxum has their own sort of belief continuum. Can you tell us a little bit about how that model addresses barriers in healthcare communication?
Sure. I mean, uh, we worked a lot on some of these rare diseases I've mentioned earlier, and one of the things was to understand really as you're bringing an asset to launch and as you're bringing it forward, what is the story that you are going to tell? What is the need that you're fulfilling, and how are we going to communicate that? So when you start pulling this stuff apart, basically what you're ultimately aiming for is a behavior change. What you're looking for at the end of the day is how to get a behavior change, how to enable people to use your product correctly in the correct patients with the correct dosing, etc. So that behavior change really needs to be understood. So that's the first part. You have to work out where you want to be, what behavior change you want to see. And then you have to go backwards and say, well, what do we need to do? What is it that they currently believe? Because the beliefs are the things that drive behavior. Your beliefs inherently enable you to behave in different ways. And if we can unpick those beliefs, then we can actually define different beliefs which will drive a change of behavior in a sequential manner from soup to nuts. It's going from the basic I don't believe in therapies and I wouldn't ever use it, right through to being an advocate. This is not about an adoption curve. This is about changing behaviors in individuals and how we can see that come about. So we developed the belief continuum to try and cover that, because it could be a multi-stepped process, could be 3 or 4 steps. But the idea is that anyone can exist, different people can exist at different places along that continuum and enable people to fit into that, but also determine what behavior changes and what beliefs we need to work on to enable those behavior changes to take place. So that's kind of how it started. We're evolving it in greater detail through some more scientific approaches as we go forward, but we'll come on to that.
I mean, so my next real question around this is, can you provide an example of how behavioral sciences have been effectively applied by, your organization to improve communication, as well?
Yeah, I mean, I can give you a couple. There's a behavioral science works in a way that picks apart that it isn't just about the efficacy and safety of products. So if you took a product, for example, in short bowel syndrome, and you say, well, actually, this is fantastic. It's a tremendously effective product. It's safe, provided it's the right patients, and it's very effective at enabling that forward. You'd think that everybody would change, and you'd think that this would be tremendous because actually we're going to move this significantly forward. Now, pulling apart a lot of that, what was discovered was actually that the patients themselves, because they'd gone through a tremendous ordeal at losing, whether it be through a road traffic accident or severe trauma or Crohn's disease, because they had lost such significant part of their bowel, they were incapable of digesting sufficient food. And they then resorted to parenteral nutrition and were happy because they were still alive and they had a routine that they could fix to. That routine to you and I would be intolerable because we're sitting here being able to eat and drink normally, right? But these people were happy because they were still alive. And woe betide, you upset that routine. One of the biggest barriers was actually getting physicians to realize that just because they had a tremendously effective drug, they had to communicate to patients in a different way to motivate them that the change was worthwhile, and the change would upset them a little bit. You know, it would disturb this equilibrium of this new normal that people talk about. This that to you and I would be suboptimal, but it's a new normal that they were happy with. So that's kind of one. I got another one where in PACS, which is prolonged acute convulsive seizures. For children, and the standard of therapy was very effective. It was tremendously effective. It was a muscle relaxant, and it was given as a suppository. Now, you have a child who has a seizure, and one thing that you have to do is try and give a suppository, right, to try and calm that seizure down. Yeah, it can happen, and for a whole bunch of social and societal reasons, but because the drug itself had good PK data, because it was safe and efficacious, doctors didn't see a need to change. Parents, carers, school mistresses, school moms, they all had a significant desire for change. So again, it was about making physicians see that they had to change to something that was a buccal administration and would be absorbed through the mouth. And you could see, anyone could see that would be a much more preferential way of doing things. But it's not just about the safety and efficacy, right? It's understanding those sorts of approaches that need to be adopted as opposed to a sort of straightforward communication.
Yeah, I mean, taking that other perspective and thinking from the patient side or even the caregiver side in terms of what, you know, how they deliver the medication has got to be absolutely critical.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and that's got to be fundamental to how you change, as well as making sure that you identify the multitude of different factors that can affect anybody's decision-making process.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you've faced transforming the way that pharma companies communicate?
I guess there's a couple. I mean, I think one of the ones that we regularly face is that I kind of mentioned it a little bit, but the fact that despite all the technological advances in science of the actual drugs that we have, the actual thought processes and approach to communications hasn't really changed. There are more channels through which to execute, but the thought processes haven't really changed. You know, we'll go to this conference because we've always gone to this conference. We're going to talk to them about our mode of action because we've always talked about our mode of action. And you know, it's you know, we've got to talk about the mode of action because we can't afford not to. It's our unique differentiation. Yeah, but you've got to make people realize that. So that's one thing. This is sort of habitual approach to communications, if you like. And I think, you know, there's a danger really that pharma might get left behind. You know, that we might that we might end up with pharma failing to communicate because of the progress of some of these fantastic new therapeutic approaches. If you fail to communicate them correctly, then the potential might be that that the physicians don't realize where they should fit, that the patients don't appreciate it, and that ultimately the patients don't benefit from these advances. So, we've got to make sure that we don't fail our ultimate customers, the patients, and the families and the professionals. So that's kind of the big one. I guess there's also a slight view that sometimes behavioral science is not understood. So there are people who talk about it a lot, but the reality is that behavioral science is a science. It isn't just market research, and it isn't some sort of fad about, let's change behaviors. There's a lot of psychology and sociology that goes into these things, and picking those apart is essential, really. And so that's certainly part and parcel of it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there is a gap or lack of understanding overall in terms of the behavioral sciences. I mean, certainly, my PhD is in organizational management, right? So it's
Right.
very focused on the behavioral science inside of organizations and how, people behave, but also how our systems and structures and processes all kind of, feed into that as well. And I feel like, as I talk to organizations, I just had a conversation yesterday, about an organization that had some fairly large gaps, and those gaps were leading back to organizational performance challenges, and it all of these things, whether you're talking about a drug and a mechanism of action, or you're talking about a, how you behave inside of, an organization, or, what the team culture is and things like that. They're all similarly related, and we can influence them. And I do feel like there's, as much as we want to rush to the finish line, not focusing on them sort of delays you even further. And so, it's one of those things that, it does pay a lot
Yeah.
of, a real, a lot of attention should be paid to these things, before you get too far along is what I'm
Absolutely.
getting to.
I think, you couldn't put it better. That you should pay attention to them while you have the chance and while you have some degree of time, right? So actually, the process, of whether it be in organizations or whether it be specifically in disease areas for a product, if you spend just a little time understanding what behavior you want to see, and then understanding what the barriers to that behavior change properly are, and not just sort of hearsay, properly are, then the results, if you do this through a scientific mode, the results will be fairly straightforward, and you will have different interpretations that can give you different behavioral change techniques. And those behavioral change techniques, and this is why it's science, it's not hearsay. Those behavioral change techniques are proven to be successful in different ways. So the interventions that you should choose are the ones that you should actually be dictated to by what the barriers are that you're trying to overcome. That's fundamentally where we should be going with all of this storytelling, and where we should all be basing our communications, really.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree with you. And as you said, the sooner you start, the better chance that you have of being successful. So, my next question is really centered around this idea of, staying linked with the industry. And, anybody that's listened to this podcast for, any period of time has heard that the one reason why life science success exists for me is because I was afraid, as I started out as a consultant, that I would become delinked from the industry. And so this is one of the greatest ways that I have to stay connected with all of you, as well, and just make sure that I stay updated. I'm just curious, how do you make sure that you stay updated, in terms of the industry on the behavioral science and pharma, industry?
We I'm an advocate for behavioral science, and I shout about it a lot. So people come and talk to me and throw things at me all the time that are around that sort of area. I also have a behavioral scientist who works in the company, and we both spend time going to the particular conferences on behavioral science and being members of the institutions and the chat rooms and things of that sort. So we're sort of privy to some of the more advances in technology and advances in thinking outside of pure pharma, which is good. Keeps you a little bit fresher. Obviously, we also are, by virtue of social media and by virtue of the internet, now much more able to link into things like life science success and others that actually, not everything is going to be pertinent to me, but that's the joy of it. You kind of have long car journeys or airplane journeys, and you can listen to the occasional thing that's good to provoke some thought. So absolutely, it's that those are key ways to be able to go forward, that you can move on, and I think that they are ones, in terms of channels, these are ones where we should all be growing and should all be actually focused. So yeah, I participate and advocate listening to a behavioral science podcast as well, which is one that we get in as a UK society, but it is, again, similar sorts of approaches.
Just in case anybody's curious, if you happen to remember the name of the behavioral science podcast, it might be of interest to people.
I will remember the exact name. It's one run by Rory Sutherland, who is the leader of behavioral science in the advertising world. He's at Ogilvy, and he runs a series. So find Rory Sutherland on the internet, find Rory Sutherland on LinkedIn, and he's certainly the strongest advocate for behavioral science in marketing and advertising.
Perfect. All right. Thank you. I appreciate that. I wanted to make sure, just in case somebody had that question mark. So what do you, there are a lot of people that I feel like in, like strategy, marketing, communications that say, hey, look, we really focus in on the messaging and the communications, but what do you think really sets Alpha Maxum apart from other companies, in terms of, pharma communication?
What we're working towards is to really drive people to think that about the use of behavioral science in planning communication. So we're putting all of our money where that leads to is not about just saying it repeatedly or doing things in a slightly different way. What we have invested in is a series of research projects that are coming to fruition that really do build a scientific platform to enable you to determine barriers and thereby the interventions that you need to overcome them. What this will lead to is, realistically, you're aware of, there's this guy, I think he was an American marketing man and great philanthropist back in the day, John Wanamaker. And his famous quote is that half of the money I spend on advertising is wasted. I just don't know which half. So, that probably is still very true today. And what we are working on is to be able to actually determine which half that is, well, not only which half, which ways you can better accomplish that. So I'm in a mission to try and change the way that pharma approaches communication planning and to adopt more behavioral science, because you can then have a validated model that pulls apart your behavior analysis, determines the components that need to be changed, looks at what interventions ought to be taken, and then determines which are the best behavioral change techniques, all of which are scientific valid methods. And as I say, we've developed this model. It's called HBIT, but we've developed this model to try and pull that apart so that we can go to different disease areas and look at this and really start showing how you can change things and how you can change behavior of prescribing individuals.
Yeah, I think, I feel like our space studies this with with a strong data driven approach. Not to say that other areas don't, but I feel like we have much more data as well about that actual performance, and how specifically, people do behave inside of a certain, area or decision or what have you. I also, though, feel like, and I had this conversation 2 days ago as well, with a leader that essentially wanted insights from afar in terms of the way that people make buying decisions. And
Mm.
I mean, I told him from a digital marketing standpoint, there's an awful lot that I know about, how people behave, what they click on, what they don't, where they pause whenever they go on the internet. I mean, we can see an awful lot of data about those things. What I don't know is why. I can see that they clicked on a link, but I have to go
Mm.
ask them why. And
Yeah.
so I mean, I kind of, I paused for a little bit because I kept thinking, is there a way to solve this particular problem? But I honestly think at the end of the day, I would love to know, how do you feel? How do you gain those insights? Because I felt like this question was one that was unanswerable by me, um, by far, and even with as much data as I have on digital marketing.
Yeah. In digital marketing, you have plenty of information, and being able to translate that into something is key. I think what we have done with this healthcare behavior insights tool is to really pull apart what would stop physicians changing their behavior in prescribing practice.
Mhm.
So by doing this, you kind of through three different methods, you're then able to triangulate that why they're doing it for greater certainty. And what we will do is keep running that through different disease areas. We've done it in Parkinson's disease because it was a nice discrete area to work in first. But in terms of being able to actually translate that, what we need to do and what anyone should be doing is looking at proper models that can then really distinguish why people do it. And we use something called behavior change wheel. This is a lady called Susan Michie and colleagues from UCL in London. She developed this tool, and that gets into an analysis called COM-B, which is capability, opportunity, and motivation, delivers behavior change. So COM-B model for determining why people put up barriers, what the barriers are caused by. And you basically have to analyze those, what you're seeing in terms of behavior, and then pick apart and then go back to beliefs, right? You have to pick those behaviors apart. Why are they behaving like that? And that's through an analysis of behavioral science analysis. And that's what we do in terms of the approaches that we would take with clients and the approaches that we would take with disease areas as well, just to sort of understand, well, why is it that they're making that approach? Why do they think like that? And so it goes right back to our discussion earlier on, Don, about the ability, not, you're trying to change behavior and you want to know that they're doing these different behaviors, why they're clicking on that and why they're clicking on that. It's about understanding what the beliefs are that make them do that,
Mhm.
and what their social context may be, or why they're motivated. It could be lack of knowledge, or it could be actual social pressures. All of these things come into play, and being able to take them apart in a managed way, a scientific way, is what we all ought to spend more time just doing before we launch into communications. And so, in terms of digital communications as well, what is it that would make you think? And if you could see that, I don't know, just throwing an example, the case studies may be other things, so you can see social context of how a drug is used or why your peers might endorse its use, then that maybe is something that you put up on the digital channels rather than, a mode of action video.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to focus on you for the last few questions, and
Sure.
and really, sort of dive in terms of a few different topics here. So, first of all, what's the greatest leadership advice that you've ever received?
Uh, I think greatest leadership advice I had was to find a purpose for what you're doing, and hold on to it. Um, there were times where one can feel a little adrift, a little uncertain of what you're doing, or that you're perhaps on a little bit of a 9 to 5 and it's all a bit routine. If you can remind yourself of that purpose, and if you can get back into that groove and why you're doing what you're doing, and I think it makes life a whole lot easier and a whole lot more worthwhile.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and staying centered around that direction as well. Without knowing that purpose, it's hard because being somebody that's solo now, after having years and years of
Mm.
corporate experience where you're setting goals, and you absolutely know exactly where you're pointed. All of a sudden, at least for myself, this idea of really defining that purpose, became much, much more important because of the fact that I was on my own. And now
Yeah.
who's there to measure whether or not if I'm hitting my goals or not?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think, it then enables you, without being sort of totally inward focused about these things, but it does enable you to hold yourself to account a little bit and saying, am I still doing what I ought to be doing? Am I still doing, part of your purpose must be because you like what you're doing, right? And having a purpose makes you like it even more. It's the old adage of if you've got somebody who does what they enjoy most, then it really doesn't become a job anymore.
Right, right. Yeah, that's exactly what was resonating in my mind as you were saying that as well. The next question. So what inspires you?
Um, I guess it's still the chance to make a difference, and I
Mm,
think I maybe it sounds a bit noble. I don't we want to be preaching, but it's about the idea of making a difference in some small way to the health of people and to the health of the populations. I'm passionate about vaccinations. I'm passionate about developing rare treatments for rare and orphan diseases and things. So being able to contribute to the understanding of the medical profession for me helps me think that actually that moves that further on down that continuum so that people hopefully somewhere down the line can get a better treatment, get a better vaccine, get a prevention from disease or cure from disease.
mm. Thank you for sharing that. What concerns you?
uh, I think the life science industry is at a huge crossroads at the moment. I think we're in danger of failing our customers. I've said that already because we don't really think we kind of have run the risk of falling into a routine of communication. We've got all these different modes of communication, but we're not working out what the human element is behind that. And if I'm blunt, then I think that AI will has the potential. If it's, I think it's more precisely if AI is used incorrectly or imprecisely or not in the correct manner, then it won't bring out that human element. It won't bring out the understanding of what the story ought to be and how it should be used and how good this could be. And it's very easy to become into something, become approaches commoditized and of meaningless and overwhelming. The actual message for some of these breakthroughs gets lost.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more in terms of AI. I mean, I believe that it's a huge game changer, and have done a lot of research and posted an awful lot online about AI. My
Mm,
As much as I feel like it can enable us, to get a lot more work done, I also think you have to be careful because the number one thing that is first lost through AI is your voice. So
mm.
AI has a collective voice that essentially it applies to everything, single thing that it writes or does. And so how that collective voice now becomes your voice is something that I don't feel like a lot of people know how to do. I had somebody come to me and say, hey, I'm trying to use AI for some of my social media posts, and I feel like every single thing that it puts out is generic. And I said, because it doesn't know your voice.
Because
it,
it
it,
is.
it
Yeah.
You have to train it, unfortunately. And so it starts with training it, and then after you're done, then you can move forward. And so we went through this
Mm,
series of steps, and I at the end demonstrated to him that essentially I could write posts in his voice, in AI, or you leveraging AI. And he was pretty amazed because at the end of the day, it did start to sound like him. But it again, you have to It's not like you could just turn these things on autopilot. And I think that's
Yeah,
the last greatest
that's
fear I have is that, okay, so one, if you don't know how to communicate or you don't understand behavioral science, to me, you need organizations like Alpha Maxum to help, sort of translate some of that and turning it over instead to um, a language learning model that essentially doesn't really understand any of these things, and it's just applying things flatly is the wrong application.
yeah. I couldn't agree more. And this idea that there's a cheats way of doing it, a lazy way of doing it, and that AI will pick up everything. That shouldn't be. I mean, AI is potentially hugely, hugely powerful, but not like that, right?
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. What's what excites you?
I guess the potential for AI still is huge. I mean, in some of the R&D areas and in some of the learning aspects there, even in communications, if it's used appropriately. But ultimately, it still boils down to making a difference. Hopefully, I still get hugely excited by the potential, whether it's helping overcome pertussis outbreaks because of reluctant vaccination or hesitation, or whether it's about gene therapy in some rare and orphan disease. These things still, I love it, and I couldn't get more excited by those sorts of things.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, the finding the needle in the haystack ability of AI to be able to go do that, to me is amazing. And I look for all of the companies. I mean, there are just so many companies that I talk to that seem to be working on the next AI model,
Yeah,
for life sciences, either within silico studies or on the back end, looking to try and translate some of the science into the real world. I mean, feels like
yeah.
truly science fiction, but at the same time it's here now. So yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's fantastic to be in the area at this time whilst these things are happening. I just hope that people communicate it correctly is really where I would stand.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, William Hind, thank you so much for being on the Life Science Success podcast. I really appreciated you coming here and sharing your story with us about behavioral science and communications, and how Alpha Maxim is applying its capability in our industry. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Todd. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks a lot.